I'm here with Mark O'Connell at Brave New World, and you wrote the book, The Mensmachine, and what's the English title?
The English title is To Be a Machine. It also has a very, very long subtitle, which I always struggle to remember. To Be a Machine is the title.
Yeah, in Dutch, the subtitle is Hoe we de dood kunnen overleven. How we can surpass death.
Yeah.
How can we cheat death?
How can we cheat death? Right, yeah.
And what's the answer?
Well, I mean, I don't want to, no spoilers, but the book is pretty inconclusive on that score. And so I look at various the book, is about the transhumanist movement, which is a movement predicated in the idea that we can transcend the body and therefore become immortal through kind of merging ourselves with artificial superintelligence and so on. I also look at like cryonics, various kinds of life extension research, those kinds of things. But my kind of interest in the movement is not really, or not purely as I'm not looking at it in terms of like, well, what's the future going to be? Like, are we going to become immortal? How will we become immortal? It's not a book that really sets out to primarily answer those questions. It's more a book that wants to look at the transhumanist movement as a kind of an example of how strange our relationship with technology is in the present. So it's a book that's much more an investigation of the present than it is the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I read it, and not to brag or something, but I also met some of the people, like Max Moore, and I also had contact with Tim Cannon, but you also spoke with Randall Koene and Sultan Istvan and Aubrey de Grey.
Yeah.
And what was the most remarkable figure in the world of transhumanism?
I get asked that question quite a lot, and my answer always changes because they were all really remarkable in their own ways. The person I sort of think about probably most often is Sultan Istvan, because I had the most fun with him. I mean, if you read the book, the last chapter of the book is where I travel across Texas, with the gigantic coffin bus. And I still think about that a lot. And, I think it's the most fun part of the book. And it was certainly the most fun experience I had. It's probably the most fun I've ever had working. Zoltan's just a really intriguing, sort of infectious, charismatic, crazy. I'm sure he wouldn't even sort of be offended with me saying that, but he's crazy, charismatic, strange, wonderful man in a lot of ways. So I think that he was probably the most remarkable person that I spent time with. But they were all deeply intriguing in their own ways. Randall, who you talked to as well, in a different way, is a very fascinating person because. I said a little bit about this in my talk. He talks about his work, which is the prospect of brain uploading, in a deeply kind of sober and rationalistic way. And so, I would sort of be struggling a little bit to keep up with the science and the sort of logical lockstep of his arguments. And I'd pull back and sort of think, but, in terms of its implications, this is absolutely crazy. It's absolutely, it's apocalyptic, the idea that we would leave behind our bodies and merge with machines. But you would expect the idea, when you hear that someone like Randall is out there trying to figure out how we upload minds to machines, you'd imagine some kind of mad scientist type, and he's anything but. He's a very kind of likable, charismatic, sort of humble man in a lot of ways.
And how when you did research for your book, I should ask the question differently. Most of the people involved are based in an Anglo-Saxon culture. Yeah. Did you also research, for example, the idea of transhumanism in Russia or Africa? Or
I did. Well, particularly Russia, because there is a whole sort of parallel tradition of transhumanism in Russia that goes back to like the 19th century. And all these ideas existed in Russian culture before they existed in the West. So, I mean, I could have written a very different version of the book that took that into account. And I did write a lot of material about Russia that just never made it into the book because it was kind of a detour. But and there are still transhumanists in Russia today, but it's much more like it's kind of scrappier over there as far as I could see, with certain exceptions. But I think really what I wanted to focus on in writing the book was not just transhumanism itself, but transhumanism as a way of thinking about Silicon Valley's sort of cultural dominance and power, and how transhumanism kind of reflects that and sort of intensifies that in a way. So my focus really, I do travel, certain parts of the book that are written in England, certain parts are, I go to Switzerland briefly and so on. So there is a kind of a European focus as well, but it overwhelmingly is about Silicon Valley.
And I was also fascinated because you also take a personal view in the book, also in the appendix or in the even the last part of the book, which I really liked. So I think it was quite an endeavor to write a book about transhumanism because you studied English literature, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm not that was a really big problem in a way, particularly early on when I was writing the book, was that I've been fascinated by transhumanism for years, like long before it ever occurred to me to write a book about it. But when I started looking into it as a book project, I would sort of get quite sort of self-questioning about whether I was the right person to write it, because as fascinating as it was, there's a pretty strong scientific element to this, and so maybe someone who had a firmer grounding in the sciences might be a better person to write it. But it took me a while to sort of come to the view that someone who's an outsider to this world and someone who is, in some ways, as I am, struggling to comprehend it and come to terms with it, is maybe the ideal kind of view that you would want, or certainly a reader like me would want. So I describe myself at one point in the book as like an emissary from the world of letters in the land of like zeros and ones. And that's kind of how I see it. I see myself as a kind of an outsider figure who's like sending dispatches from this strange kind of other culture in a way.
Yeah. And in a sense, it's not that strange because also here at Brave New World Conference, there were also some remarks made about immortality and transhumanism, which also was based with the ancient Egyptians, with the mummification, etc.
Yeah. So that's what's always been so interesting to me about this, is that it is deeply strange and deeply alien and seems quite external in a way. Like these people are, when you look at them first, they seem to be very much outside our culture, but their extremity is something that reflects ideas that are absolutely central to our culture, actually. Like we don't want to die. And so much of our culture in the West has to do with like ways of circumventing mortality and like separating the mind from the body or the soul from the body and so on. So transhumanism absolutely expresses things that are peculiar to our like culture, I think. So that's what's really interesting about it, is that it is outside, but it's also central as well.
Yeah. Last question. Do you also get asked to give talks on really transhumanist conferences, and how do people respond?
I mean, I actually rarely enough get asked to talk at transhumanist conferences. Occasionally, but no, I don't know. And I think, like, I've had like the response from transhumanists has been, I think, kind of mixed, and I think that's understandable because anyone who like gets written about tends to be uncomfortable with the way that they're written about, unless it's like a complete hagiography or something like that. But I think it's an uncomfortable thing to be seen from an external point of view and have that external point of view fixed in a book or a film or something like that. So, my American publisher sent it to everyone that I wrote about and most of the major figures in the transhumanist movement. And some of them I heard back from, some of them I didn't. Randall emailed me when it came out and was... his parents had read the Dutch edition, actually, which he was really happy with. Zoltan I'm still in touch with, not frequently, but we still keep in touch. I heard from various people. A lot of them I didn't hear from, and so you would assume that maybe they weren't happy with it. So, But no, I'm not. I've not been subsumed into the transhumanist movement by no means. No.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.